Hello, everyone. What a great panel. I thought that was a fascinating discussion. As you've heard, I'm Mark Green, President and CEO of the Wilson Center. You know, we're a unique institution in the policy realm in that we're actually chartered by Congress. And so our job is to go beyond spin, to go beyond numbers, and to look at independent, objective, religiously nonpartisan analysis. When I became the head of USAID, I was asked, what is it that surprises you in the world? And really what it was that surprised me was the sheer scale of the problem of human displacement. Today, these days, there are more than 100 million people displaced around the world. Simply put, people are not where they were and not where they're going to be. And the great challenge of these times is how do we deal with that? I brought that same sense with me to the Wilson Center, caused us to dedicate an entire issue of the Wilson Quarterly last fall to what we call Humanity in Motion. And we had a realm of really wonderful, interesting, and I thought thoughtful pieces. Today is the inaugural event of our new initiative on refugees and human displacement. And we have a rare privilege because I get to actually call upon one of those authors, someone who wrote what I thought was the most optimistic and hopeful of all of the contributions to the Wilson Quarterly. It's our friend, President Yvonne Duque of Colombia. Mr. President, welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Green. Thank you, Mark. It's a great honor for me to be here this afternoon. And it is a pleasure for me. And I have to say this before we begin this conversation, that I am very proud to be here with you today, because all that we've done in Colombia to manage this migration crisis and be able to attend our brothers and sisters from Venezuela would have not happened without your support. So I also invite the audience to give you a big round of applause, because you have been a leader behind international cooperation on this front.
You're very kind. So, Mr. President, as generous as you are, we've only got 25 minutes, so my job is to get at it with you. So, Mr. President, you made news in last year in the spring when you announced 10-year temporary protected status for Venezuelans. And you talked about the need for them to be integrated into the social fabric of Colombia. But what I think a lot of people in the North, in the United States, didn't realize, this was hardly the first step that you had taken. When you took office, you talked about an open door policy towards Venezuelans. In 2018, you took steps to guarantee healthcare, education, and social services for those poor Venezuelans who had been forced to flee tyranny in their own country. In 2019, you began to develop a strategy to help those Venezuelans earn income. So TPS was only the latest step in the progression. Help us understand what your thinking was along the way. How did you go from that first day all the way up through TPS?
Well, thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate your question. I have to say that during the years that I lived in the United States, I was able to understand how migrants enriched or have enriched the history of the United States. And since then, I started researching and studying the phenomenon. And actually, I found a great book that was written by JFK while he was president, called A Nation of Immigrants. So as I started researching and trying to get more into the weeds of those subjects, I was also able to know more about the TPS that the United States at a certain point granted to countries in Latin America, or citizens from other countries in Latin America, as it did happen with Salvadorian citizens in the 80s. So those kind of policies made a big influence on me. And obviously, while I was working at the IDB, I was privileged to meet Senator John McCain. And I remember how at the time, he was trying to bridge a bipartisan approach to migration. And actually, he tried to work with, at that time, Senator Barack Obama on building a comprehensive migration bill. So I was involved in looking at all these policies. And when I decided to run for the presidency after being in the Senate, I said clearly that we had to think in a model where many countries in Latin America could have a temporary protection status. But I also said since the beginning of my campaign that I would, if I were elected president, open the doors for the Venezuelan brothers and sisters and basically try to give them solutions because they were actually leaving the country because of a brutal dictatorship. So as I entered office, we started working, first of all, on the open door policy. We had a national economic and social planning document. We started working on giving the Colombian citizenship to children at the risk of apatride. And we were able also to start providing some social services. It was either school or health. And then as we started working closely with the communities, we decided to make this big step in 2021. And I created a team inside the administration with my chief of staff, Maria Paula Correa, with Lucas Gomez, with Juan Francisco Espinosa, and we launched this amazing policy. And with this policy, what we have done so far is that we were able to bring 1.8 million Venezuelans to have the same rights as Colombians, with the exception of the political rights. And as of today, Mark, and I will finish in order to be precise in the response, and we have demonstrated that if you have a fraternal policy, it pays back because people have become invisible. They can buy a house, they can look for a job, they can enter the social security system. And in fact, we have been able at the same time that we're attending this massive migration crisis to reach the lowest informality levels ever in the labor market in Colombia. And something that goes hand in hand, we have been able to reach the lowest multidimensional poverty rate since we started using this methodology 12 years ago. So what drove me to this is fraternity, but it's also the common history that we have with Venezuela. When we were in need in the 1980s, 70s, or 60s, the Venezuelan people opened the doors for many Colombians, for millions of Colombians. And in times of despair, we've done the same. And I think today, with the help of the USAID, the United States, and obviously it's something that you began working with me some years ago, I think we have been able to demonstrate that if we work aligned in making this win-win situation with progress, having the TPS, and we have already granted 1 million TPS cards, we have demonstrated to the world that this is possible and that this is the best way to say no to xenophobia or to indifference.
So you just got, I think, at what is the next question, the key part to this. So you announced TPS. Announcing something is easy. You had done so much of the work leading up to it. And since that announcement, what have there been barriers to implementation? What are they? And what progress is Colombia making?
Well, Mark, I think the first challenge that you face when you embrace this kind of policies is that these policies are not popular. So you have to be aware that in order to build an open door policy for migrants and be able to embrace them and give them their rights, it is not popular. So you have to take a lot of heat. And if you're thinking on popularity, this is going to drop your popularity numbers at the lowest that you can imagine. Why? Because there's a lot of negative sentiments around these kinds of policies in the whole world. And also because there's a lot of prejudice. People are full of prejudice. People believe that if you embrace migrants, then they're going to disrupt the labor market. They're going to trigger an exponential growth in poverty. A lot of these sentiments happen. But I think we have been able to demonstrate that if we do it correctly, and that's why we call this campaign visible, which is, okay, we're going to grant them the rights, but we're going to start differentiating with providing a temporary protection status card to 1.8 million migrants. And I remember when we launched the policy and I said, we're going to reach the first million within a year, people didn't believe it was going to be possible. And we already did it. We have already granted 1 million TPS cards to Venezuelan brothers and sisters. And we have now 800,000 additionally that have already passed through the biometrical recognition and the pre-registry. That means that in the following weeks, they're going to receive the TPS cards. And for example, today that I'm here in Colombia, and unfortunately I couldn't be there presentially today because we're here inaugurating works in schools. And this morning I came to this school and there were 4 Venezuelan children who came to me and they said, Mr. President, thank you, because you have treated us as if we were Colombian citizens. And what I told them is that our first constitution that was launched in 1821, in October 6th, had this amazing article, the article 83, about the Gran Colombia. And it said that foreigners in La Gran Colombia will have the same rights as Colombian citizens. And our Article 100 of our Constitution today also embraces the opportunities to have a fraternal policy with migrants. So the challenges are there. And the next big challenge was, how do we create the opportunities for those citizens who are coming to Colombia with frozen bones, lacking the access to health services, to really feel that they're welcome. And I think we did a great work coordinating with mayors and governors so that they understood that either you do this correctly or the problem is going to be much worse over time. So in my opinion, that worked. Now, not everything has been rose-colored, and we have other challenges. And I think one of the challenges that I should mention is that, yes, this has been visible to the international community. And we have organized a lot of roundtables of donors. But what is clear, Mark, is that there are many pledges, but not many disbursements. So maybe the case of the United States is a success case where the United States has put the resources where the speech is. And we have seen that with some other cooperation agencies, but it's not been the phenomenon worldwide. And maybe the most eloquent way to describe it is that when you look at what happened in the Syrian crisis, there was an average of around $6,000, $5,000 per migrant over the course of the management of this crisis. When you look at South Sudan, it was more than $2,000 per migrant. And when you look at the Venezuelan migration crisis, it doesn't go up to more than $300. So most of us have taken a lot of the fiscal burden behind this. And I think it's very appropriate to say that we need to match the pledges with the disbursements. And obviously now with the horrendous crisis that has been triggered by the genocide that is taking place in Ukraine, obviously there's going to be more difficulty in trying to gather resources from the international donor community. So I'll say that's the most important challenge. And maybe the other one that I would like to mention is the political one, because xenophobia happens either directly or subtle, but it happens in order to deal with these situations. So defeating xenophobia was very important to us. And I think that working with the Catholic Church in the case of Colombia, with the Christian Church, with the Evangelistic Church, helped a lot in different communities to get people to sense that this is a matter of generosity, not charity, and that we needed as a whole society to understand that they were here already. And if we didn't grant these opportunities, they will be invisible over time. By allowing them to be visible and having them for 10 years with the temporary protection status, they will become also net contributors on the economic expansion of our country. So I think we were able to show that win-win is possible in migration management.
Mr. President, probably the highlight of my time at USAID was one of those visits to Cúcuta in which I saw so many groups and just individual citizens from Colombia welcoming and taking care of and putting their arm around the poor Venezuelans who have been marching for days to get relief. And it really was a remarkable thing. But you point to what is, I think, the challenge and what I worry about. Some weeks ago, I had a meeting, public meeting with the Commissioner for Refugees, UN Commissioner for Refugees. And he said in many ways, the crisis in Ukraine is causing a double crisis in other places like Colombia and Venezuela, in that we're distracted. Funders are distracted, resources going to the immediate, and they're forgetting about the extraordinary crisis, in the case of the US, in our own neighborhood. And secondly, we are forgetting about the causes of that migration, and we are not dealing with the crisis in Venezuela, the regime in Venezuela that set things to flight in the first place. So Colombians are generous, everyday Colombians are generous, but they need the resources to help them to be able to take care of these numbers. What are you trying to do to help bring attention to the world once again that we must not forget these poor people, millions who have fled?
Mark, first of all, I think making this visible is very important. And that's why I'm so honored that the Wilson Center under your leadership is making this issue not only visible, but we have to call for a coordinated effort internationally. But I'm going to say this bluntly. At the beginning of my administration, we try to work every day with international cooperation agencies. And yes, we have received support. Now, has that been enough? No, it hasn't. Now, efforts like the one that you took at a certain moment with USAID in order to tell us, we're going to work in the border zone, we're going to create these nutrition attention centers, we're going to work and trying to make visible the access to healthcare system. Things like that were very meaningful. We also received strong support from other agencies. We did with the Canadian agency, with the Spanish agency. But overall, and I think that's my criticism, I see two major problems in the way the international community responds to these kinds of crises. One is that there are too many pledges and too many individual pledges. So there are pledges from country A, B, C, D, E, and N, you name it. And each country has a cooperation agency. So they all try to do the best with their resources. But then, as I say, it becomes a collection of vests. So we're in a certain area of the country with vests from each of the cooperation agencies, each one of them trying to do their best. But we lose a lot of focus. We lose a lot of coordination effort. And what makes this more complicated is that we end up doing micro projects, while at the end, what you need to have is an overall policy that works for to attend the magnitude of the problem. So I think with those two challenges, and obviously knowing that we were waiting for too much aid to come, and it didn't, we had to take a decision. And that's the blunt decision that I wanted to share. We said from our standpoint, we're not going to wait for the money to come. We have to do it with our own resources as much as we can. And I think since we made that decision, it was clear that we had to put it on the budget, that we had to strengthen the institutions that attend the migrants, and that we were able to focus more our efforts. So why has it been a success to have 1.8 million migrants registered in Colombia and to grant 1 million cards? Because we decided to make the strongest budgetary decision on our own, but also with the support of international organizations and international agencies. USAID has supported us in that. It has created one of the most important programs to attend the migrants. And Lucas was referring to that in the previous panel. When we look at this effort where we're going to create migrant attention centers, that works. But I think the most important decision we had to make is we could not rely in just thinking that international aid was going to come and was going to solve the problem. We had to do it on our own, making a big budgetary effort, and obviously trying to mix the right combination of resources that come from international agencies. And the other thing that I consider is maybe the most complicated challenges that we definitely, and this is something that I raise not to criticize, but to call for a lesson learned. We need to merge all the international agencies' effort in having big programs, and maybe it could work like a social bond instead of micromanaging each specific agency's resources, because it won't have the impact that you're waiting for. I think so far we've made good progress, and I think the policies that we have set has become a reference model, not only for Latin America, but also for the world. And maybe the best way to put it on the table is that many countries that are bordering right now with Ukraine are looking at our model and our advisory in order to use our methodology to attend this massive, horrendous crisis that has been triggered by the genocide that Vladimir Putin decided to take against the Ukrainian people.
Mr. President, in the brief time we have left, I'm going to ask you something looking forward. So part of the reason that we're gathered here is that this group, this project, again, with the generous support of the Conrad Hilton Foundation, is looking beyond the immediate humanitarian needs, emergency food, emergency medicine, emergency shelter, and thinking about what it is that we need to do to help people have a ladder out of vulnerability. So how do we liberate people and give them a more hopeful, brighter future? What would you say are the services that we need to prioritize if we're going to realize your vision of social integration?
Well, Mark, I should say that the world migration problem is not going to start a diminishing cycle. I think we're going to see in the course of the next decades more and more migration. And there's a phenomenon that I think we all have to consider, and is that we're going to see an explosion of climate-driven migrants around the world. We're seeing floods, we're seeing transmittable disease, the rising of the sea levels, coastal erosion, and that brings poverty, that brings illness, that brings despair, and people are going to try to leave those circumstances and try to look for a brighter or more promising future. So we're going to see those migration phenomena. And I think we have to be prepared for that, because otherwise what we're going to see is that many of these situations are going to be dealt in other countries with xenophobia or indifference. So the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that we live in a world where there's a massive migrations for multiple reasons. Either it's climate, either it's COVID, either it's conflict, either it's inequality, you name it. So we have to first acknowledge the size of the problem. The second thing is that we have to kill the prejudice that migrants, when they come to a country, they destroy socioeconomic values. That's not true. And we have been able to demonstrate that fraternity, well-managed migration fraternity policy, allows the migrants to incorporate successfully into the economy and obviously access the services and goods and privilege that we have in our society. So on the specifics of your question, which are the services that you have to think on providing? I will mention 5. One is nutrition. We have seen a lot of children that have crossed our borders in a very bad situation in terms of nutrition. So you need to have nutrition attendant services in those areas where you're concentrating the borders. The second thing is you need to ensure health care assistance. And what was very complicated, and I remember that we had this conversation many times with you, is that the migrants come to a territory. They go to the hospital. They enter the urgency lines because it's the only way they'll get an attention. But since they are not insured, once they leave, it becomes a rising debt to the hospitals. So we need to solve that. And that's why we need to start integrating the migrants into the subsidiary regime in the case of Colombia, and think on other subsidy methodologies in other countries. The third element is education. You definitely need to guarantee that children who are in the migrant population will have the possibility to access the education system. The fourth one is that once they are there, you need to configure the access to jobs, to the labor market. So you clearly need to have a regulation where they can look for a job and they will not be treated in a diminished way or below the conditions for the case of the Colombians or in other countries of the nationals. So you need to provide them the same level of guarantees when it comes to the labor force. And fifth, and maybe it's more important, is to have about the concept of financial inclusion, but also the possibility for them to become landowners. If you don't make them visible legally, and if they are not able to open a bank account, they're going to be informal. So with those 5 set of services that guarantee their access, I think you'll have that sound policy. We still have many challenges ahead, but we have been able to guarantee those 5 elements to the migrant population in Colombia.
Mr. President, you've been very generous with your time. I could go on for a while, but I suspect your staff who is here would drag me off the stage. Mr. President, thank you. Thank you for today, but also thank you, quite frankly, for your leadership. One last thing I'll note to everyone is that when the withdrawal from Afghanistan occurred and we saw the flight of migrants and refugees, about the first country to step forward to help was Colombia. Even with all of the challenges that they were facing, they were very quick to step forward and help out. Mr. President, thank you for it all. And God bless you in the work that you're doing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador Green. Mark, it has been an honor. And also thank you to the Wilson Center and to all the organizers of this event. I really want to express my gratitude and the great honor that it has been for me to participate. Unfortunately, I missed the possibility of being there presentially, but I look forward to see you soon. And let me just mention one thing that I consider very important nowadays. We have to look at migration with a different perspective. And if we do it, I think we'll have a much better world. Pope Francis wrote about fraternity in Fratelli Tutti, his great encyclical. But I think also the history of nations such as the United States is the history of a nation of immigrants, that all those flows of migration, Italian, Irish, Mexican, Colombian, all of the ones that you can name, Asian American, all of them have contributed to make the United States what it is today. So if we, instead of letting politics, polarization, and negative sentiments create prejudice, we understand that when people are in need and they're looking for an opportunity and we grant that opportunity in a sustainable way, it clearly becomes a win-win. We've tried to do it in Colombia, but we would not have done all the things we have achieved without the support of people like you, Mark, of organizations like USAID, and also at this point in trying to make this great world outreach without the help of the Wilson Center. So I thank you all, and I look forward to see you pretty soon in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.